Alrighty. Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. So as Andy mentioned, I am Becca Bruggman. I'm going to move over here so you can see my slides. I'm a staff technical program manager. I also semi-jokingly refer to myself as the Chief Experimentation Officer at Optimizely. For anyone who doesn't know, Optimizely is an experimentation platform. We also do optimization as well. So what I'm really doing is making sure we're walking our own walk. And I run what's lovingly called Optimizely on Optimizely. So with that, hello. Hello. So this is a little bit more formal stuff about me. I've actually been at Optimizely for 4.5 years. Since Adrian was doing fun facts, I'll do one as well. My start date is very easy to remember. It is 4/20. So I will be hitting 5 years in April. I actually started on our support team, and then I moved into a solutions architect role, which is basically doing proactive support for a lot of our biggest customers. And then about 2 years ago, I became a technical program manager. If you are looking for a job, we are hiring across a lot of roles, so please come talk to myself or Justina and Jeff afterwards. We'd love to chat with you. Anyways, so enough about me. Let's talk about experimentation. So what I'm first going to do is show you the agenda, what we're going to go through. So I'm going to cover why we created an experimentation program at Optimizely in the first place. We were rocking and rolling on some experiments, but it was more in an ad hoc way. Why did we move to this kind of program model? What does it look like today? What is the process that made it possible for us to move into this program and also get so many great experiment results, as well as what does ideation look like on our teams, and then visibility. All right, let's do it. So I'm going to start with, as I mentioned, I started at Optimizely quite a while ago. In 2015, we actually rolled out these personas, and one of the first ones was this lone wolf. And the lone wolf was actually our founder, basically. When Optimizely was created, it was basically created for Dan Stroker. He built the product for himself. So he was working at the Obama campaign, doing a lot of experimentation. He was like, this has to be easier. So this was kind of one of the personas that he was himself. We realized we had some of these other folks to kind of help out with experimentation as well. So we had people who were implementing, doing strategy, developer, and analyst. But they're kind of still all a little separate, and it's also missing a couple of other things to really make a program successful if you're looking at it from where we are now, which is more selling to large enterprises and really doing digital transformations. And those are things like me, a program manager. I have all the arrows. I connect all the people. Keep the trains running on time, and then an executive sponsor. So you can think of me, I'm sure a lot of you do this, I lead without authority. I can't make anyone come to a meeting. I can't set anyone's OKRs. I can just say, hey, I bet you want to run that experiment. It'll be really awesome. But my executive sponsor is in those executive meetings, can set OKRs. So that's where the two of us, with our powers combined, can be really powerful. So in Q1 of last year, one of our other founders, Pete Kuman, got up and was like, hey, we're telling all of our customers to move into this program model and really take experimentation seriously and do this like larger initiative for it. We need to be doing that too. We need to be walking our own walk. So we'd been running experiments, but more in an ad hoc way, and he really wanted to make sure we were moving into this program model. So he launched that in Q1. I came on in Q2 as a technical program manager, and I have this picture from Q2 of last year. And it's actually interesting because basically when we were rolling out all of our new processes to kind of get our program going and really getting our experiment program like engine really operating at full speed, I was just like, we just need to try these processes out and do kind of a crawl, walk, run. So as long as something was going through Optimizely, as long as it was being implemented in that way, following our processes, following all of our new meetings, we're like, it counts towards the OKRs, we just need to get people really going through this. So that's kind of where we started, and then I'm going to show kind of where we are today and what our processes look like. Cool. So I'll take a step back. What is an experimentation program anyways? I keep throwing this word around. What exactly does that mean? Well, that means you have people really dedicated to experimentation. Like experimentation is 80 to 100% of my job. And so I'm always thinking about experimentation. I'm always trying to evangelize internally to make sure people are always thinking about this and looking for new ways to experiment. So what does the dedicated team at Optimizely look like? So we have, and I'll move over here so you can see them. This is me, and then we have Claire as well, who's our newly minted Chief Product Officer. She's amazing. So this is kind of what the team looks like on the Adept team, which is what we call our product group, which is a design, engineering, and product team. I got that right. And then we have our marketing group over here. So we have our two executive sponsors kind of on each side of the house. So we have Claire, who's our CPO, and then Michael O'Connell is our head of demand gen. And then within marketing, and I'll go through kind of what our team models look like within there, we have a couple of other folks. So we have Bryce, who actually implements experiments. He's an engineer. And then we have Takeshi, who helps with implementation as well as SEO. So these people are really dedicated and really thinking about experimentation. And that's kind of where it sort of becomes a lot more of a program. So I'll do some definition just around kind of what our program structure looks like. And this will be helpful as I'm going through things like ideation and visibility, because it'll kind of contextualize why we approach things in this way. So on Adept, we have something called a Center of Excellence. Now, how you can think about this is we're basically a service organization. So myself and Claire, we do a lot of the things like process, running the weekly meetings that we call experiment review. They're almost like a design review, but strictly for experiments. And doing visibility, alignment, all that good stuff. And then each of these teams are like our engineering, we call them squads. So they're each of our individual engineering groups. So one could be like our full stack group, or like the group that runs just our results page. And then the fourth team off to the right is almost like our marketing team, and I'll get into how they're a little bit different. But each of the individual engineering teams are doing their own ideation. I'll support them on that, but they can do a lot of them internally, as well as their prioritization against their own feature backlog. So what this means for me as a program manager is that I have to basically influence them to run experiments and make sure I deeply understand what is moving the needle for them in terms of the new features they're rolling out. So what are their big retention metrics? What are they gold on? What are the things that are going to get them promoted? So I can remind them like, hey, you should really run an experiment with that. Cool. And then in terms of marketing, we have what's called an individual team. So that's why we have a couple more folks on that team, because we're actually doing a lot of our own ideation, and we're definitely doing our own prioritization and build. So that's kind of the pros and the cons of each of those. I'm not doing as much of the building on the engineering side, but on the marketing side, we are doing most of the building ourselves. However, we control what gets prioritized. We have a lot more control over the velocity that's happening because we're doing that rather than having to do the prioritization on the engineering side. Cool. So that's a lot of context around what our programs look like. Now I'll kind of get into the process today that has allowed us to go from kind of more this ad hoc to more this full-fledged program. And what's nice about these, I'll just call it as I'm going through them, is if you have agreed upon processes across your organization, then you get to do the fun stuff around being creative and running experiments and not have to think every single time you have an experiment, what's the process for this? Who will code review this for me? Who will build this for me? Because those are all agreed upon and already happening. So there isn't really a big secret. It's a lot of documentation. So some of the key documentation we have that I'll call out that I think is really helpful, and I'll go kind of most general to most specific, is starting with what we call Go OOO, which is very confusing. It's not out of office, it's Optimizely on Optimizely. But how you can think about this is all, if you were a new Optonaut, a new person in Optimizely, you could come here to learn about our program at the highest level, who the key people are, what the key Slack channels are, meetings, previous blog posts, previous presentations. So if you really wanted to get up to speed on what was going on broadly in the program, you can go right here. Next, we have top to bottom how to run a web experiment, and this is especially important on the product. So this is the project to use, who to talk to, who's going to do your code review, what to title it, everything. And what's nice about this too, on top of it just being a good resource for like onboarding new people, is that if people have a different opinion about what should be in here, there is a single source of truth. And they can have the conversation within here, so you know where it should be happening. Cool. We have a similar one for full stack. Now we separate these out just because the code bases are really different and the considerations are really different. For a client-side experiment, it's mostly just like JavaScript and things like that, and you're making modifications to the UI. While in full stack, you're getting a lot more deeper with the code. You probably have to go through a lot of different squads potentially to do your code review. But again, if people want to make changes, they all talk about it within here. Cool. So I'll go through our end-to-end process, and then I'm going to get to ideation. But you can kind of see how this builds. And I will say, before I even go through this, it's going to be a little overwhelming. But I want to remind everyone that this took multiple quarters and a lot of re-education to do, and your process might look different depending on what your needs are. So we have Evan, one of our old product managers. He wants to run an experiment. So first, he's going to start by logging an idea in program management. So a lot of people have a lot of different systems. This is what we use, which is one of our own products. But basically, it's a way to just manage all the experiment ideas in one place. So whether that's a briefing sheet or a spreadsheet for you, just as long as it's in a single place is really helpful, because then you can go to prioritizing it. We have this nice scoring feature, but you can also do something similar like this, just based on whatever are the inputs you want them to be and getting more of the team involved. Then he'll log a ticket in Jira if it requires engineering work. From there, we have this beautiful wall of work, which I'll show more pictures of later. But my boss actually manages one. It goes from dreaming to doing, and it is about the length of this stage. So since it would be something happening in the app, we would also want to make sure that's there, something that is happening and going through the flow of our system. Cool. Then they'll come to experiment review, which is what I mentioned. It's kind of like design review, but for experiments. So basically what this is just to elevate everyone's approach to experimentation. So you talk about what's your hypothesis. You talk about your metrics. Do those metrics actually align to your hypothesis? That does not always happen. And especially when we were first getting going, this was just really helpful to just make sure everyone was on the same page of what good experiment design looked like. And then I make everyone, and we'll go more into this in visibility, but I make everyone, every time an experiment starts, send a company, like team-wide email. There's a couple reasons I do this. One, it's exciting to share that you're launching an experiment. It's amazing. I get a lot of responses from these just because people are like, this is amazing, this is super cool. But also, if I haven't checked, like if there's anything that goes awry or whatever, like even with all the QA that we've done, people know that it's there. And also just keeping up the visibility for the program and people know that it's going on. And then Evan will get results. He'll get so many learnings. He will start the cycle all over again. All right, we've laid a lot of foundation. You kind of know what our team looks like now. Now let's go into the ideation, the visibility stuff. Cool, and we'll start with product and engineering and what this looks like. So this is actually one of our designers, Shane. And one of the things he was looking at was sort of thinking through the lens of like usability and customer feedback. Now this is something that designers are going to be really familiar with. You're always looking to see how can my product better serve my customers. So he kind of took a look at this page and was like, there's lots of nouns and verbs, and like if I click things, do people actually know what happens next? And as you can see, people had a lot of opinions on this. I took this screenshot before people were done commenting. So we got several more in there. And about 60 comments in, one of our product managers was like, hey, why don't we like run a test on this to at least be data-driven on what we decide to do in terms of this UI. So what we ended up deciding to do was run this experiment. Now, it's a little bit subtle, but in the second and third cards, we have things that are a little bit more explicit about what will happen when they click on that. And now experiment review came in really handy here because the product manager was like, okay, I want to run this experiment because I really want to try and make the usability better within this screen, but what am I measuring? Like, what's my success metric here? And what we came to was basically if we reduce the number of times that people are basically immediately clicking back out, like they click on something, they're like, oh, this isn't what I expected it to be, then that would be kind of what moved the needle, because we would be expecting that people kind of understood that that's what was going to happen when they clicked on that. Cool. Next, I'm going to talk about painted doors. So this is actually one we ran a couple months back, and it was something for a product called Flexible Stats. Now the reason we personally ran this painted door, and one of the product managers on our data team did, was because this is for a very specific persona. It's for like a data scientist. It's for someone who's really deep into like the analysis of a experiment and really cares about that. And they were actually having kind of a hard time reaching these people to get the feedback they really wanted. So basically what they did was add these two cards where they say preview right there. And if someone clicked on it, you'd get a modal like this. So it was like, hey, seems like you're pretty into this. Do you want to give us feedback? And what was great is they actually saw a really good funnel for people who had pretty high intent on clicking on the drop down to say, yeah, I really care what this looks like at the end of the day because this is really going to impact my day-to-day. So it's a really good kind of companion to doing that user research because they were trying to do that outreach, and this was a way for them to kind of get in touch with the people they cared about the most. Cool. And then one thing I'll kind of dive into a little bit more in terms of step-by-step, and something that I think it's really interesting in terms of growth design, since it's more, it's really thinking about the data surrounding how to approach an experiment and just like overall product improvement, is an experiment we ran a couple quarters ago. And it was run by actually the product manager you saw earlier going through the entire process, Evan. And basically, one of his big OKRs was to get better retention on our results page. So this is basically, you run an experiment, you go to the results page, and you see what the results of that experiment are. And he wanted people to be coming back more to be getting value out of it. So he put some data into segment and amplitude. And what the delta is here that these arrows are showing is that if people used our segmentation feature on the results page, that they were more likely to be coming back over a certain time or interval. And what segmentation is, how you can think about it, is basically doing a date range for your results, doing cohort analysis, anything like that. So they're kind of slicing and dicing their data more. So he's like, okay, how do I get people to use this and see it more? What could I do? So he took the page, he ran it through heat map analysis. He's like, ooh, no one's looking at that. There's the arrow right there. There's the heat map right there. No one's seeing the segmentation, which is at the very top where that arrow is. So he started thinking about how could he approach this. He logged the Ideation program management, as I mentioned earlier. You can see very good, all these metrics, a good hypothesis, really thinking through what needle he was trying to move. And so then it's a little subtle, but he basically just took the segmentation. It was a fairly straightforward test setup and moved it closer to the center of the screen. So it wasn't just so tight at the very top of the screen. So he puts it back through the heat map analysis. Oh, we got some color there. We can actually like see a little bit, like people are seeing this a little bit more. And he ran this, and we actually had statistical significance on this, which is amazing because as you notice, we're not dealing with just like unlimited data here. We're an enterprise software as a service company, so we're dealing more in the like tens of thousands of users. So to hit statistical significance and have a winner is a really big deal for us. So that means we're gonna celebrate, y'all. Pusheen's really excited. We gotta get some gifts out. Thanks, y'all. Cool, so I've taken you through what ideation looks like on product. Again, those are the product managers really leading that. They have to really take those very thoughtful swings because one, the traffic's not super high, and also they need to keep it really close to what's going to move the needle the most for their products. Now, on to marketing, where again, we're doing a lot of our own prioritization, our own building, and we also have a lot more traffic to play with. So our biggest thing is how do we get lots of ideas coming into the funnel so we can then prioritize and figure out what to build. So what I do is I run a lot of like ideation type sprints. I do a lot of user journey mapping. So if you're a designer, this should feel really familiar to you. So as you can see, this is one of the pictures from this. And basically what I do is I just get a bunch of people in a room. And I'm like, I bet you I pick people who really care about a specific page, and then we just really drill in on that very specific page. And we start with, what are all the problems you see on this page? And then we put them in Post-it notes, we start doing clustering, and then from there we think about solutions and experiments we can get from there. So again, this should feel really familiar to you in terms of just being like thoughtful through your design process. And then we also do user journey mapping. And this is actually really helpful if you have a large whiteboard, because you start to see where is friction, where are pain points, where could there be optimization, where could there be experimentation. So both of these together are really helpful. So just to visually show kind of what an ideation session looks like, again, it's that kind of problem solution result. And so at the end, we usually have quite a few experiments that we can get into our funnel, which really helps because then we can think about what to prioritize and what will have the most impact. And again, when we're kind of thinking about this and we're really deeply looking at those pages, we're using a lot of those like user side principles, which have been brought up in earlier talks. And a lot of these are more like conversion focused or marketing focused, but again, it's just really helpful to keep in mind like what are we trying to move and what's important for our users to drive them towards kind of the action we're hoping for them to take. Cool. So from one of our ideation sessions that I ran with our awesome sales development reps, we looked at the plans page. This is a page they really care about because they want those leads coming in, they want to talk to those customers, they want more of them. And what's really, what was great is they had tons of opinions. They were like so enthusiastic to do this. And once we had kind of gotten all those ideas in, I got maybe 20 distinct ideas from that, I made sure to share back with them what was the outcome. And I think this is one of the things that I think about when I think about a really good designer, is that they don't just think that they are the only person who gets to have an opinion on a design just because their title has designer in it. And so I think it's really important to share back, take them on the journey, share back what you decided in terms of an outcome, and that's kind of what I like to do here with my ideation sessions as well. So what that means is once they get prioritized and I do all the variations, I share them back on their Slack channels. This is also really fun because then people get to like emoji vote. Who doesn't like to emoji vote? So it's really nice to be able to have people have a discussion also after the fact to say, oh, I think this one's going to win, and get excited, and just re-engages people with the process. So this was actually an experiment we ran last quarter. These are the variations. So it's a pretty straightforward experiment in terms of setup at the end of the day. So plans page, the only thing above the fold was a free trial. And the SDRs were like, what if people just want to talk to sales and like free trials and actually what they want to do? Can we test that out? That's also something that's a little bit more exciting and valuable for them. And what's awesome, y'all, we hit statistical significance on both these variations, which is super dope. And then the SDRs get to feel like Beyonce. So many people won with their emoji voting. Yeah, you get to do a little hair flip. It's great. So we've gone through all the ideation. Now I'm going to remind you, show your work. Make it visible. It is very important. This is me getting on my soapbox about visibility. It is so critical. One, share your excitement. Share what you're doing. People want to know what's going on. Also, we've had quarters where we are not running the experiments that I hoped we would have. And the nice thing is, if we send that email that's like a recap that's like, we only ran, X number of experiments. If someone emails you back and is like, this is just not where I thought it would be, it's like, great, let's talk about it. I want to get some more resources from you. Let's have a conversation. So I am just such an advocate for making the work visible. So how do I do that? Lots of boards, lots of boards. So I did a lot more of this, especially when I was really getting the program like ramped up, because I just wanted to meet people where they were. So again, these are actual pictures from our dreaming to doing wall of work that I mentioned earlier. So this is like a summary of everything that was happening in the quarter, and then this was like in real time how it was moving through our system. So again, lots of visibility, meeting people where they are, very, very important. And then I do a lot of speaking at company meetings. This is me talking in a nice sparkly dress, which I love. And it's just really important to like go and share your enthusiasm for the work that you're doing, especially when you're like leading without authority. You can't make anyone come work for your program or do experiments. Being able to say, this is really awesome. I'm going to build a culture of FOMO because you want to be doing this. So it's just really helpful to be sharing all of that enthusiasm to get people re-engaged. And then, as I mentioned, we do company-wide emails announcing all of our experiments. Again, I'm a huge advocate for this, as I mentioned earlier, and I have a standardized template for this. So again, it eliminates people being like, I don't even know what to send, I don't know what to do. It's just like, here's the template, here are all the examples. Just share the awesome work that you're doing. Another thing I will mention, this one happens to be for me, but if anyone is running the experiment, make it come from them. Like, just because you're the program manager doesn't mean you just send every email. People get sick of always seeing my face on an email. So it's just good, whoever's closest to the work, to send the email. So we also do that for our results, and this is actually Perla. This is from her first experiment she ever ran. She was so excited. She tweeted about it. It was so great. But just getting the visibility from this, and what's awesome is like people in Europe who I don't interact with on a day-to-day basis because they're, however many thousands of miles away, they emailed me back and were like, this is amazing. How do I get involved in this? So by doing so many different touch points and just so many different ways of how you're sharing what's going on is the way to understanding and the way for people to know what's going on. And then, as I mentioned, we run experiment review. This is really helpful also for visibility, just so people can see what's going on in the program. I have Slack channels where I share the agenda every week. I also have a doc that has all the notes of every single agenda we've had, every single experiment we've gone through, so it just really helps for people to be able to see what's going on. And then finally, I do a quarterly recap. And maybe it makes sense for you to do monthly. We do quarterly OKR, so that's kind of how I approach doing this update. But it's just good to have this kind of summary of like, yeah, you've seen all these individual emails come through and yeah, all these experiments have happened, but let me summarize to you how big of an impact we've had in this time period, and just being able to share like all the other things, like I'll share ideation sessions that have happened within here on top of all the experiments. And I also do a recap of every single experiment. So links, who ran it, what the name is, details, all of that good stuff. And my final plug for visibility is that sometimes when you send these emails, your CEO even responds. And this is fucking awesome, I'm gonna swear. Because, I mean, Jay, of course, cares a whole lot about experimentation, but he has so many other ways in which he's pulled in every direction. So getting a response back, he knows the work that I'm doing, he sees the impact. And also, the things that he asked me to do, which is go share this with customers and prospects, I'm doing right now. So, thank you so much. I'm Rebecca at Optimizely. Yay. I'll take questions if there are any.
Do you have any questions? Right here. Where can we find the template? You said
you can email me, Rebecca at Optimizely. I have templates of those. Okay. I'm also planning to make them into a blog series this quarter, so look out for that.
Awesome.
I have actually a couple of questions.
What's up?
Thanks a lot for the presentation.
You're welcome.
How many experiments do you guys usually run at the same time? Per week, per month, per quarter?
Mm-hmm.
And do you recommend actually running several experiments within different parts of the funnel? Or you're rather focusing on one particular part of the funnel that you're trying to improve or fix?
So I'll answer your first question, or your second question first. Anything where it's influencing throughout, I get very reticent about experimenting something where it's like it would be hard to decouple what the actual change was. So if the downstream metric is like, I don't know, conversion or buying something, and you're changing like every single step, how do you know which of the steps actually move the needle? Like that's where it gets a little murky. If you want to run it as like a multi-page, even that, I would just decouple them if you have enough traffic to do it. And then the number of experiments you asked, it really varies. It kind of depends on what other things are going on in the system. I will say last month we ran 9, and that was 2 on product and 7 on marketing. And that split actually makes a lot of sense for me, and that was actually a pretty banner month for us, if I'm being completely honest. And we just have a lot more traffic to work with on marketing, so we can just output a lot more, and also just a lot more pages that we can work with. So we have like landing pages, we have webinar pages, we have resources, we have all these different areas we can be testing where they're not conflicting with each other. While on product, you have to take these much more thoughtful, kind of larger swings often, because we just don't have as much traffic, and a lot of them are more complicated tests to set up, because a lot of the times they're going to be like full stack experiments. So, did I answer your question well? Great.
Awesome. I think hold on, where's the microphone? I just dropped it. Oh, you have it back there. I'm like, yeah, because we're kind of low on time.
That's fine.
But I wanted to say a big thank you to Becca. Thank you so much. And anybody who wants to learn about the templates or email her with questions at Rebecca@optimizely.com.